Good evening. Thank you for attending the meeting of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee on the Tuesday, 12th of December. We have a little bit of an unusual situation. Unfortunately, Chair and Vice Chair are unable to be with us this evening. And as per the Council's constitution, we are required to elect a chair from the remaining members of the committee. So do we have a proposer to elect a chair, please? Councillor Gleeson.
I propose Councillor Gabbard.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Rainsbury. Can we go to the vote then? Can we have a show of hands, please, for Councillor Peter Gabbard to be elected as chair? Thank you. Hand over to Councillor Gabbard now.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'll quickly go through it. So before we start this evening, I'd just like to outline some housekeeping rules. There are no planned fire alarms. So if it does sound, please leave via the emergency exits. Can I also request that all mobile phones are switched off or kept on silent? Thank you. And the members of the committee are attending in person here at the Civic Centre. We may have other members of the council dialed into the meeting via Microsoft Teams to observe and/or participate in the meeting. Just to remind everyone, only members of the committee present at the Civic Centre are entitled to vote. And please note, this meeting is recorded and live streamed live on YouTube. The web link for this is displayed on the agenda for the meeting. Members on Teams are asked to keep their microphone on mute and only unmute when they wish to speak. Could I remind members to unmute themselves once they have finished speaking to enable the meeting to proceed smoothly? First off, I'll start off with item 1, which is apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair, I've had apologies from Councillors Jane Bell, Julie Buttery, Hilary Bedford, Jasmine Gleave and Councillor Wharton Hardman. And we do have Councillor Rainsbury here this evening substituting for Councillor Gleave. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up on the agenda is declarations of interest. Members are requested to indicate at this stage in the proceedings if any items on the agenda in which they intend to declare an interest. Members are also reminded that if the interest is a disclosable pecuniary interest, they must leave the room for the whole of that item. Has anybody got any declarations of interest? Brilliant. Moving on again. Item number 3 is minutes of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee. I have the minutes of the last meeting of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee held on 12th of September 2023 in front of me for approval. Are there any points of accuracy on the minutes? If not, can we propose the minutes for approval? Thank you, Councillor Hancock. Thank you, Councillor Gleeson. And then for the vote, please, as well, can I just have a show of hands? Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you very much, Councillor Rainsbury. Moving on to item number 4, which is minutes of the General Licensing Subcommittee. I have several sets of minutes from the last meeting of the General Licensing Subcommittee for approval. We'll take this as a block vote. Are there any points of accuracy on any of those minutes at all from any members? No, nothing online. Can I ask for a proposer and a seconder for the item? Thank you, Councillor Stevens and Councillor Gleeson. And then all those in favour of approving the minutes? That's unanimous. Brilliant. Move on to item number 5, minutes of the licensing panel. We have a set of minutes of the licensing panel held on Tuesday, the 7th of November. Are there any points of accuracy on those minutes? Brilliant. Any proposers? Thank you, Councillor Gleeson. Seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hancock. And all those in favour to approve the minutes? Brilliant. Unanimous again. Right. And then item 6 is vehicle age policy update, the consultation feedback. Members are advised that the report can be found on page 25 of the agenda. And I'll invite the Council Officer, Chris Ward, to present the item. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a quick PowerPoint to run through with you members, so I'll just pop that up on screen now. I won't be a moment. So back with the consultation feedback for the vehicle age policy and licensing of Hackney carriage vehicles. So as a recap, at the last meeting of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee on the 12th of the 9th, 2023, members received a report updating on the effectiveness of the vehicle age policy introduced in 2022. In April 2022, members passed a new vehicle age policy which gave emphasis for new restrictions on the ages of vehicles licensed by the council depending on the emission rating of the vehicle. With the vehicles with an emission rating of Euro 6 could be licensed up to 6 years old when first licensed and then stay licensed until 12 years old. Whereas vehicles with an emission rating of less than 6 could only be licensed up to 4-year-old when new and then up to 8 years old staying on the fleet. In 2022, the vehicle age policy was passed until 2025, but members also asked for an update every 12 months to report back on if the policy was working as an incentive to buy low polluting vehicles, the availability to drivers of electric and hybrid vehicles, and compliance with our equality duties with regards to the availability of wheelchair accessible vehicles. Officers advised that the policy was working, and since it was introduced last year, officers have found that all new vehicles licensed have been Euro 6 vehicles. This with the exception of some larger vehicles licensed as special need transport vehicles, as per the exemption wording, and these have all been Euro 5 or above. That's in line with the ULEZ rules by the Transport for London. Officers advised in September, prior to the policy being introduced in June 2022, the fleet of vehicles licensed by South Ribble Council only had 10 hybrid vehicles. Since then, 16 additional hybrid vehicles had knocked it up to 26. And since September, we've actually got another 3 hybrid vehicles now on the fleet, and it stands at 29. Vehicle proprietors are clearly seeing the incentives of buying hybrid, low polluting vehicles, which they can keep licensed for 4 years longer because of Euro 6 or above. These vehicles with low CO2 levels are helping the council towards its aspirations of being carbon net neutral by 2030. So the availability to drivers of electric vehicles. So at the meeting on the 12th of the 9th, we ran through the availability, if there's any changes since last year for electric vehicles for the trade. Officers have researched cost and availability of those electric vehicles. And officers explained that although some second-hand vehicles have been found at a lower expense now since last year, fit-for-purpose vehicles are still being seen as out of the price range for drivers. Additionally, the cheaper vehicles have got a low range, with the majority of them doing less than 200 miles in one charge. They're not capable of performing the required number of miles in one charge, potentially leaving vehicles sat either charging or waiting to be charged during peak times. So you can imagine at 3 o'clock in the morning when people are picking up from pubs and nightclubs and things like that. There could be people waiting outside for vehicles while these electric vehicles are on charge. The market for electric wheelchair accessible vehicles, which are fit for purpose, is still on the table also for our drivers. The council caps the number of non-wheelchair accessible vehicles, which means new Hackney carriage vehicles would need to be wheelchair accessible. And these vehicles are in excess of £40,000 for used electric wheelchair accessible vehicles with a range capable of performing to expectations, which is, again, it's completely unattainable at the moment for the trade. Additionally, the current infrastructure, charging points in South Ribble, it's not capable of accommodating for the taxis trade at the moment to charge all the vehicles. Again, if the council was to change to an electric-only policy, vehicles not be able to charge quick enough to accommodate the demand from residents. So just a couple of examples that we provided last time. So following images of WAV-type vehicles, wheelchair accessible vehicles. Obviously, a £60,000 Mercedes Vito is well out the price range for a taxi driver. There's one for £65,000 there. Both not brand new vehicles, 2022, one's 2023, but it's not brand new. The ranges on those are higher, but like we said, they're out of the price range for taxi drivers. We have found some lower price vehicles, still quite exceptionally expensive for drivers at £24,000. But if you look at the range on that vehicle on the left, it only do 137 miles, which isn't any good for a taxi driver. Also, we found one for a wheelchair accessible vehicle for £16,000 there, and the range on that is 106 miles, which it isn't fit for purpose for the taxi trade. And then the same again there, one for £25,000, which the range on that's 174 miles. So compliance with our equality duties as a council when licensing vehicles for wheelchair accessibility. So the current position, the council needs to keep a balance of wheelchair accessible vehicles and non-wheelchair accessible vehicles available for its residents. Capping the number of non-wheelchair accessible vehicles as we do keeps the number of wheelchair accessibles on the fleet available for wheelchair bound passengers. As the council does not cap the total number of Hackney carriage vehicles licensed, any vehicle licensed after the cap is reached on saloon type vehicles would have to be a WAV type vehicle. Council has a duty under section 165 of the Equalities Act. All vehicles licensed as wheelchair accessible vehicles have to carry passengers whilst they're in the wheelchair, not to make any additional charge for doing so if the person chooses to sit in the passenger seat to carry the wheelchair in the boot. To take such steps is reasonably necessary to ensure that passenger is carried safely and in reasonable comfort, to give passengers such mobility assistance that's reasonably required. So what problems did we find with the current policy? The new policy wording is working, as we've mentioned. We've seen 29 hybrid type vehicles come onto the fleet. It's a step towards the aspirations of the council to be net carbon zero by 2030. Gives drivers an increased margin to be able to licence the vehicles, saloon type vehicles, which the old policy was up to 8 years. It's now up to 12 years if the Euro 6. But we've recognised this problem where 11 of the vehicles still haven't been changed, and they're all either MPV or WAV type vehicles, and it's 11 in total that are now older than 8 years, which would have complied with the old policy up to 12 years. So the 11 vehicles are all Euro 5 rated, and they're all of transit type, van or wheelchair accessible vehicles. These vehicles have been licensed for the authority by some time. They're older than 8 years old, and they were all licensed before the new policy was introduced. The type of vehicles that are normally adapted for wheelchair accessible transport, normally small converted vans or MPV manufacturers have taken longer to implement the engines which are CO2 rated Euro 6, as they don't use the same engines as normal cars. The cost of purchasing these types of vehicles are excessively more than saloon type non-WAVs, as we've just seen on the previous slides with the price of the electric WAV type vehicles. Unmet demand for wheelchair users. Officers are concerned that should we enforce these vehicles no longer being licensed, these 11 vehicles, we may see an unmet demand for our wheelchair bound passengers within the borough. Council has a duty to license wheelchair accessible vehicles and keep a list of the advertised vehicles to the public. So there's no unmet demand for vehicles by our wheelchair bound residents. Exceptions from the ULEZ zone for these types of vehicles. So ultra low emission zones in London, the wheelchair accessible vehicles have all been exempted from that until at least 2027 at the moment by the Transport for London, where they don't meet the required emissions rating when they're a WAV type vehicle. So recommendations by officers. Officers recommend to make a minor amendment to the policy wording to include WAV and MPV vehicles that are not Euro 6 compliant to be exempt from the policy and licensed until 12 years of age. This would only be relevant to those 11 vehicles as mentioned that are not compliant. The equality duty on the council to provide a diverse fleet of vehicles for our resident in officers' eyes are just important as working towards the council's objective for air quality. For that reason, the remaining WAVs and MPVs should remain on the fleet until they're 12 years of age. So the decision by the committee on the 12th of the 9th, members agreed to proceed to the consultation exercise to explore extending the exemptions from a Euro 6 policy to all WAV wheelchair accessibles and MPVs. This means all WAVs and MPV vehicles will be licensed in line with the Euro 6 vehicles from 6 years old when first licensed until 12 years old. Members agreed to receive a report back to them today with the consultation responses. So consultation, so we wrote out to every trade member via email. We received 5 responses from the trade. They were all in favour with changing to the change to the policy that we're proposing. And recommendations now to committee are to consider the consultation responses from members of the trade and determine whether to proceed to accept the officer recommendations as per the new policy wording to include all wheelchair and multi-purpose vehicles to be licensed up to 12 years of age. If members are minded to accepting the recommendations by officers to forward this on to the next meeting of the full council with recommendations for formal adoption of the proposed policy. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for your thorough report as always. Right, I invite members to raise any issues they have or queries on the report. Anyone wish to speak on it? That's wonderful. Do I have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Gleeson. And then a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. And then a show of hands, all in favour. It's unanimous. Brilliant. And I think that's the end of the meeting, really. I thank all officers for attending, all councillors for attending, and all those via Teams as well. I think we've got a raised hand from Councillor Ullensworth. Can we put her through, sir?
Thank you. Sorry, I did try to get my hand up in time, but I didn't manage it. It's just a query about the phrase wheelchair bound. People who use wheelchairs prefer to be referred to as wheelchair users. It's a much more positive phrase rather than bound. And I think I just thought I'd pass that on. I hope that's okay.
Can you mute yourself, please, Councillor Unsworth? Brilliant. Thank you very much.
To adapt to that,
Yeah, I don't think that's an issue. I think we can change the policy wording for that. So Chris will obviously go away and amend his report and bring that through to the next council meeting and thing comes through. Nice. Just to make sure everything's correct and everything, can we go back over and propose the amendment to policy wording? Thank you, Councillor Gleeson. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Hancock, and all those in favour again of the amended with policy wording. That's unanimous. Brilliant. So again, thank you to all the officers for attending, all the committee members, and all those via Teams. Thank you very much, and I'll close the meeting.